Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cover Age series about aging solutions. Today we have Molly with us. Molly is a gerontologist that has over 25 years of experience working with older adults and their families. In addition to her professional work in this arena, she's also journeyed alongside her mother of 12 years as a caregiver and a daughter, that lovely dual relationship. Molly founded VistaLynk to promote awareness and develop solutions to reframe our vision of aging and caregiving. Molly, I'm going to turn it over to you if there's anything else you'd like to say about yourself and your background, and then feel free to jump right in.
Well, thank you, Marie. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm really excited to be here and to talk to you all today. As Marie mentioned, I'm a gerontologist and have been passionate about aging and caregiving for most of my adult life. But I did care for my mother, which I felt was probably my most important role in life. And it was a journey of both joy and somewhat difficulties. Transitioning somebody from this life to the next can be very rewarding, but it also can be bittersweet. And so, but I learned a lot as a caregiver, and I now turn to my work in order to share that with those who I serve. So I founded VistaLynk about 20 years ago, and really our goal is to move the concept of aging forward. And by moving the concept of aging forward into more positive light, we also bring the caregivers with those who they care for. So today we're going to talk about caring and caregiving and how to help caregivers. I know some of the information that I'm going to share will probably be you'll probably know, but I think it's important to sort of frame how, where we are in terms of a society and how we got here, and then look at ways to move forward. So everybody knows about the boomers. Aging is a boom in the US, and it's actually a boom worldwide. But if you look at the life expectancy and the amount of people, 65 and older from, if you look back a century, we've really seen this tremendous growth in older adults and in aging and longevity. And that's really wonderful. The only downside of a longer life is that because of the increase in chronic diseases, people are living longer, but in a state of chronic disease. And so it's really turning into a situation where we have people we have a larger aging population, but we also have a growing caregiving population. And that's sort of representative. We look into the future and we see the aging population. Most, age populations used to be pyramids where you would have more younger people and fewer older people. As we progress into the next half of this century, we're going to see our aging population become a rectangle. And so we're going to have just as many older people as younger people. And so there will be fewer people to care for those who are aging. And sort of coupled with this growing aging population and caregiving population is the fact that, and I'm sure this is not news to anyone on this call, that the funding for our Older Americans Act, which provides such critical services to our aging population and their caregivers, has been flat for over 20 years. And so we're seeing this huge demand, but we're really not seeing the funding following that. I'm hoping that in the next several years that trend will change. But for now, you guys are fighting a heroic battle, trying to serve your populations with very little funding from the federal government. And so with the rise of older adults, we obviously get the rise in people supporting them. And who are the caregivers? They're 48.5 million strong plus, and that's caring for, people 50 plus. That doesn't include caregivers who might be caring for someone with disabilities or even obviously caregivers of younger children. Predominantly women, although men are becoming more and more caregivers as well. We're seeing with smaller family sizes, that men are involved in caregiving as well. Typically, women do more of the hands-on care. Men will tend to do more of the hands-off care. That's just sort of the way it shakes out. The average duration is 4.5 years, but obviously can go on for many more than that, depending on the circumstances. And people are providing at least 20 hours of care a week. And that, again, is on top of having a family, a job, and other demands on time. And if we were to put a dollar amount on the value of caregiving in our country, it's right here, this is in billions. It's showing us that, the help and the assistance and the care provided by family and friends is almost equal to the largest company in the world, Walmart. So $470 billion. And again, these numbers are back as far as 2015. So I'm sure that number has increased since then. But you can see that, long-term care support and services about 225 billion. So that's about half of what, Walmart and family and friends provide. So we know that there are some effects to caregiving. We're going to kind of look at, some of the physical, the emotional, the financial impacts of caregiving, just so we can frame where we are and where there's some need. And then we can look at some of the solutions. So health consequences. I first want to say that caregiving can be a joyous and rewarding and really meaningful journey. But if not supported, or if it can be, somewhat demanding, or if it becomes somewhat demanding, there can be some serious health consequences. And it's just important to be aware of. So obviously, elevated levels of depression and anxiety, being responsible for someone's health and well-being. No one is trained as a caregiver necessarily. They're, daughters, sons, nieces, nephews, spouses. They're not necessarily medical professionals or legal professionals. So, having demands on their time, having to navigate very complex, fragmented systems can create times when, depression and anxiety can be elevated. Higher use of psychoactive medications, so having, to treat for depression and anxiety, that's been shown, from research that they have a higher use of those types of medications. They are often reporting, physical health, high blood pressure, diabetes, sleep deprivation. So all of that can lead to, not feeling well and being sick, calling in sick, things like that. Compromised immune function. Obviously, if you're not getting rest, if you're under a lot of stress, your cortisol levels can be raised and your immune function can be diminished. So, caregivers are at risk of becoming ill themselves, and they're often have an increased risk of early death. And that's particularly true for elderly spousal caregivers. So caregivers who are 70 plus have, I believe, a 65% chance of predeceasing the person that they're caring for. And over time, these health effects, negative health effects, can take a toll on someone's overall life expectancy. Then so if that's not bad enough, the financial impact. So caregivers are often helping out financially. They're often making decisions that impact their finances. There's a trend now, which is referred to as going from the career track to the caregiver track. And so people are leaving their jobs altogether for their caregiving responsibilities. And women can lose up to $324,000 over the course of their lifetime due to their caregiving responsibilities, leaving their wages, the benefits associated with those wages, like Social Security, IRA, or pension contributions. So on average, women lose $324,000 when they make that choice, and men, it's $283,000. And that's a significant impact to someone's financial well-being over the course of their lifetime. That's a retirement nest egg that is not there anymore. Contributing to the cost of care. Oftentimes, elders can't afford their own medications. They can't afford their own care services or resources that help support them. And so families will contribute and caregivers will contribute to the cost of that. And those out-of-pocket expenses can be quite extreme. Again, this is an older report, so from 2016. I'm sure these numbers are even higher. And I know for a fact that when someone is caring for someone with dementia, these costs almost double. So, just the household expenses, helping someone maintain their independence, live in their own home, cleaning services, food, groceries, things like that, is a large percentage of out-of-pocket expenses, as well as medical expenses, helping with, subsidizing what their medical insurance might not cover, any kind of medical equipment, things like that might be needed. Caregivers are helping out with, as well as some of the, transportation to and from appointments, any kind of legal expenses for drafting any kind of documents that might be needed, as well as paying for out-of-pocket expenses for services and care, as well as any kind of personal items. So you can see that, $7,000 a year is a big sum. And again, if you're talking about caring for someone with Alzheimer's, it could be almost double that. And as we know, caregivers are working along with their caregiving responsibilities. So right now, 1 in 5 caregivers are working, whether it's full-time or part-time. And they're doing it with 20 hours plus a week of caring for someone else. So that's a lot of hours in a week between work and care. It's all ages and all levels of seniority. I often say it's anyone from the mailroom to the boardroom can be impacted by caregiving. So it really is an important consideration for employers to be able to support their caregiving employees, because 20% of the workforce care an average of 20 hours a week, and they'll be doing so for the next 20 some odd years. So this is a situation that we're going to see continue. And I think when Marie and I started this conversation, we were saying that there are some things that the pandemic has illuminated, and obviously caregiving has been one. I think in all my years, I've not heard the word caregiver on TV or on the radio or in public or in the papers as much as I have this last year, because not only are caregivers, up against a lot of challenges from the pandemic, but they're also, doing it while they're trying to maintain their own lives. And employers, for the first time, have seen into the lives of their employees, that they never had an opportunity to see before. And what's really kind of good about that is a majority of employers are starting to look at providing employees caregiving resources and caregiving benefit programs. So that would really be a great, thing to come out of the pandemic for caregivers. Because we know that higher levels of stress obviously leave someone feeling overwhelmed, they're in poorer health, and they often decide to leave. And for employers, this could be a very costly and detrimental after effect of caregiving, because they have to try to retain their valued employees. They have to rehire and retrain if employees decide to leave. Plus they cost, from an insurance standpoint, if employers are providing insurance, they cost the employers more because of their health and chronic disease. So we know that the emotional impact of caregiving, we've talked about the fact that caregivers are really facing a lot of challenges, and that can provide, the conflicted emotions. They want to be there for the ones they love, but they also want to be doing their, what they need to do for their families, or they want to be enjoying friendships and social occasions. So they often feel conflicted. Some are burdened by societal expectations because they're a son or a daughter. They're expected to take on this role when they didn't ask for it, but they feel obligated to do it. And some relationships aren't ideal. Some parents and children relationships aren't good, and so it really does put an additional burden onto somebody who may not, feel particularly close to the person that they're caring for. Obviously, we've talked about depression, and that is, because it's sad to see the people that we love need us in a way that, they may have always been there for us, and now we have to be there for them. And seeing that change of relationship can be, it can cause people to, to become sad and depressed, seeing the change in their parents or their loved one. The sandwich generation, we talk about the fact that, a person might be caring for their children while they're caring for their aging parent. There's now what they call the Whopper generation, which is someone caring for a grandparent, a parent, and children all within the same time. We are fortunate that with longevity, we've seen more generations alive at the same time, but it also can put on an even greater demand, finding and being able to support multiple generations. And then there's family dynamics. As I mentioned, sometimes relationships aren't ideal with a person that needs care. Sometimes families don't work well together. Sometimes there's power plays. There could be, the burden can fall onto one person, and the rest of the family just kind of sits back and waits, or doesn't, know how to help or doesn't help. And so it can cause, family dynamics can be, can come into play with someone's health and emotional well-being. On the flip side of this, because I don't want people to think, oh, goodness, this is awful, that there is a sense of fulfillment. I mean, being able to be there for the people that we love and to be able to see people that we love thrive in whatever way that they can does provide a sense of fulfillment. Looking at our, coming together as a family, coming together with other caregivers can really broaden our circle. I know my own experience with my mother. When I was caregiving, I felt sometimes very isolated, but I also met some amazing people who I would not have had the opportunity to meet had I not been a caregiver and reached out to certain groups or been involved in certain informational sessions and things like that. So even some of the providers who came to help my mother towards the end of her life, they were amazing, and I felt so gratified, and I still keep in touch with some of them today. Feeling needed and useful. Caregivers are usually caregivers because they're good at caring. They're usually very organized, and they're caregivers for a reason, because they are the person who can be depended on. And so being needed and useful really is one of our goals as humans, right? And then having an opportunity to grow in our role, to take on challenges, to be at someone's side while they're in need, it can be very meaningful. One of my favorite quotes of all time is David Hyde Pierce played Niles Crane and Frasier. I don't know if you remember that show, but he's a longtime spokesman for the Alzheimer's Association. And back in 2015, he was at the White House conference on aging, and he was the chairperson, and he started off the conference with this quote, and he said, "To age is to live, and to care is to be human." And I think if anything sums up what we're about as humans and as beings, on this earth, I think that is it. If we're graced with a long life or the ability to live into our later years, we are also graced to be able to care for those who need us. And I think being able to recognize that, there isn't we're all striving for this independence, right? We're all striving to be independent versus dependent, right? When I think we really want to be interdependent. And if we can strive and understand and sort of frame our caregiving and our aging around this interdependence, that we have a real opportunity to kind of change the way we view both aging and caregiving. So how can we help caregivers? I mean, they need a lot from time to time, and depending on circumstances, there are different ways of supporting caregivers. I think one of the things I've found is empowerment, just talking to caregivers, sometimes getting them to see that if they start planning, if they can start sort of figuring out what needs to be done and just sort of chip away at it, instead of, waiting until there's a crisis, sometimes that can really help families immensely, because when you have a crisis, your emotions are heightened and trying to make decisions can often be very difficult. And being able to provide a sense of competency, helping caregivers see that, they are not a professional, they are not trained in many of the facets needed in caregiving, but giving them resources and being able to help them see that there is often no wrong choice. The wrong choice, or the choice that's not desired, is not making a choice or taking the first step. Sometimes it's just about getting started and having a conversation with a parent or a loved one, or looking at your siblings and saying, hey, we need to talk. Sometimes just starting the ball rolling can be very empowering. And then providing them a sense of competency that they are doing the best they can. Obviously providing support, access to reliable information and resources. There is a lot of money to be made in aging, and there are a lot of providers out there that do less than ideal work, but there are also a lot of many more organizations that do really wonderful work. It's just right now our system is fragmented, and so being able to help caregivers see and know where to go for information and what resources are available really helps to support them. And by conducting outreach, bringing caregivers together to talk to them, to get access to information, doing, marketing towards caregivers is really supportive, because this last piece, connection, bringing them together, builds a community of support. Too often caregivers feel isolated, probably this year more than any other year, because of being literally isolated and quarantined. So bringing together, helping to build a community of caregivers together in a support style group is really important, because we learn from each other. And there's a lot of innovation going on in the grassroots level, and families are figuring things out. And it's really great for opportunities to share sort of best practices and what's happening and what's working. And so there's some new research coming out called, so the social determinants of health, I'm sure everyone is aware of, is housing, transportation, food. Those are the factors that help drive health and well-being. There's some new research coming out around the personal factors, and they're called the personal determinants of health. And this really is both in aging overall, as well as I'm sort of applying it here in caregiving, that these personal determinants of health are shown to drive health and well-being just as much as the social determinants of health. And so they fit into 3 overarching buckets. So it would be purpose, optimism or possibility, and people. So purpose, it's giving people, a sense of why they're doing something that they're doing has meaning, and that they're here for a reason. And so really, having people sort of attached to that higher sense of purpose. And for caregivers, you could see where that could really help them to overcome some of the other challenges they might be facing around caregiving, is when they really look to the bigger, the greater, the more purposeful role that they have. And optimism, trying to keep caregivers to have or maintain a sense of optimism over a long time is really helps them to build out a better sense of joy and purpose for why they're doing what they're doing. And then keeping people connected to each other, feeling connected to those we love. That's very important, and it's been shown, all of these have been shown to foster resilience, and resilience is a very critical skill that helps us to sort of bounce back or navigate difficult experiences. And that sense of resilience is what really is sort of a buffer to sort of staving off illness and depression. So fostering this resilience is really key in helping caregivers. And so I just want to give a few minutes just to sort of show you. So, one of the things that we've done is we've taken this research on the personal determinants and the psychosocial, needs of both older adults and their caregivers. And we've created a series of 2 programs called the Connections Learning Series. And what they've done is they're in a methodology called docu-training. And docu-training is an educational format, and it's real life stories. So we went out and filmed real life caregivers, real life older adults, and we've taken their stories, and from their stories of what's working for them in their situations, we've built an evidence-informed framework of skills that help foster these personal determinants of health. So these programs have a video component, and they have a workbook component. The video component, the real life stories, is that peer-to-peer learning modality that really is based on social learning theory, where people learn from one another. And so the stories that they hear in the video or watch in the video helps caregivers to imagine for themselves what might be possible. And so within these 5 skills, there's interactivity, and there's questions that become self-reflection questions. So it's a sort of looking out and seeing what others are doing and how other people are successfully navigating their caregiving role, and then they go inward into their interactivity and self-reflection and bring it alive for themselves in their own lives. And these programs can be done together in a group setting, either virtually or in person, that can foster that community connectivity. And so we also have, so the Changing Perspectives is the program for caregivers. And as I mentioned, it allows people to, or allows caregivers to maintain a sense of purpose. It helps them to maintain their optimism, and it helps, by fostering their ability to choose. I'm in this role because I want to be in this role, and I'm going to make the best of it while I'm in this role. And it helps to shift their perspective, but I'm also going to do this role and be in this role and take care of myself in the process. And then it connects them with people. They're not an island. They're not living on an island. And this program encourages them to not only talk to others about their situation and what they're going through and sharing, but it helps them to bring others into the care circle. So maybe having conversations with other family members or other, members of the team about, becoming more involved. And we're really trying to move the needle from, this idea of self-sacrifice, overcommitment, and basically, putting out all kinds of fires to looking at caregiving as a more sustainable growth experience. And so for our, the companion program in the Connections Learning Series is for aging and creating vitality in aging. And this is also tied, these are also tied to the skills in this program, to the personal determinants of health in aging. And so really helping to foster, purpose, optimism, and connectivity to people through the skills taught in this program with the same format, video, real life stories of elders who are, living and engaged in their lives, and how, not everybody's got an idyllic situation, but they're making, choices, and their aging is they're navigating aging in a way that is inspiring. And so we've taken those skills, those lessons, and done the same type of format where the video stories create possibility, and then the interactivity is where, I say the rubber meets the road for older adults, where they can bring the skills alive, in their own lives. And the idea is, again, to move, age forward, but it moves us from this demise and diminishment to more, possibility and fulfillment. And so the programs can be delivered. It just coincidentally, we went digital. We brought the programs online in September of 2019 to be able to be utilized on demand. People could do it at their own pace, but we also had the and it just so happened that we were 6 months away from the global pandemic when on-demand learning would become such a need. We also have the traditional in-person, if groups were brought together in the olden days. The videos would be watched and people would break into groups around a table, and they would do the program traditionally. But now with the on-demand version, there's also a facilitation version where the programs can be done as a group through a virtual platform. And it's been really rich and rewarding to watch groups come together in non-traditional ways, but still the feelings of enthusiasm and the learning from each other is still just as robust. And then with the programs, there also are these discovery group formats, which we felt were really important to, you're teaching these skills, and people are getting very excited about what they're learning and how the program's taking shape in their own lives. And they didn't really want it to end. So we created these discovery groups, which are ongoing groups. And each of these discovery group sessions have their own format, so that there's a structure to the meetings around the different skills that the programs are highlighting, and how people can share how they're taking on those skills in their own lives over the course of time. And we also have a webinar series that we felt was really important. A lot of this is, some of this is very practical, tactical information, around the services that caregivers can use to support them or their loved one. But some of them we were really intentional about creating some of the psychosocial, or meeting some of the psychosocial needs of caregivers, and helping them sort of, with the relational aspects of caregiving, how to find their own strengths, how to navigate the emotional terrain, how to set boundaries, but then also how to look at, building a team of caregivers, building a team around your loved one. How do you navigate your sibling issues and those kinds of things. So they're more the social and the relational aspects of caregiving. And then we finally, again, because you can only, there's so many differing caregiving needs that, not everybody can just grab onto one thing. We wanted to make sure that we were as comprehensive as possible. And we created 2 guidebooks, one from the standpoint of caregiving, how to start caregiving, what are some of the practical aspects of caregiving, how do you get started? There's checklists, there's conversation starters, all those kinds of things. And then on the flip side is how do you, as an older adult or somebody who's sort of, starting the aging process, how do you help your family help you? And, the idea there would be to sort of preemptively have some conversations before there again is a need to, for swift action, and sort of looking at, what might, how you might shape things for yourself as you grow older. And that is really it for this presentation. And I want to thank you so much for your time and listening. And I'll take any questions if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, we do have some questions.
All right. Can I unshare so I can see?
Oh, yeah, of course.
How do I do that?
So if you go back to the tab where you and I were talking.
I see you. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then stop presenting there.
Got it. All right. Yay.
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 Thank you so much for sharing all that information. Especially as a social worker, I really love your approach of seeing a caregiver in their ecosystem, right? So there is the psychosocial, there is the financial, there is all of these other things that they're trying to balance. And how can we realistically help you do that at any point in your caregiving journey? And I love, you had shared with me when we talked a while ago, the personal determinants of health, and I totally latched onto them. I think is like when we talk about resiliency in social work, when we talk about resiliency with the vulnerable populations that we work with and with older adults as we age, that's just the perspective to have. I feel like building resiliency, building empowerment, and I love your approach to that. One question that someone had during your presentation, you mentioned, sometimes one of the stressors a caregiver has is they're taking care of somebody who they don't have a good relationship with. Maybe it's a parent, and they don't have a good relationship. What advice would you have around navigating that?
Well, I would say the first thing, and I say this is true whether you have a good or not so good relationship, is you have to know your boundaries. You really have to say, I will do this, but I won't do this, and really giving yourself the ability to pick and choose, how you approach that situation. Obviously, if there's any kind of toxicity, because, some parent-child relationships, some parents weren't the best parents. And so kids are like, I'm 18, I'm gone. And then all of a sudden, 12 years later, they're called upon to come back. And so just knowing, what you will do and what you won't do, and being okay with making that choice, like allowing yourself, it kind of plays into that societal expectation piece where, oh gosh, I'm the son, I'm the daughter, I'm the niece or nephew, and, I'm left holding the bag. I got to do this. Knowing what you won't and making peace in your heart with that is what you will do or won't do. And then I would say, the next piece is to try to find others who will do it. So finding surrogates who don't have that same, negative relationship or difficult relationship, who can step in and help out. So, finding other members who might be able to do some of the work, so you don't have to do everything, and so sort of parse out what you can, but being really clear, like, this is, I won't do this, and I'm okay with it because it's what I've chosen.
That's great.
And that as a social worker, that's sometimes the hardest step, is to be clear in your own mind, like, this is not what I'm signed up for.
Yep. I like when I like encouraging individuals to actually say it too. You
Mm,
can kind of feel like this is pushing my boundaries, or I don't know that I'm comfortable with this. Being able to pinpoint, like, I'm feeling obligated to do this right now, what's actually okay and what's not okay, and being able to tell that person, I will not do this.
right.
But I can help find somebody who will do it.
Right.
It's just really great. So for the programs that you're currently running, what are some examples of the changes that you're seeing in these caregivers? What have you
Oh,
witnessed?
oh, I mean, everything from, a caregiver who, had called a family meeting with her siblings to say, you know, we all need to get on the same page and we all need to, come together, and I'm not doing it all. And that wasn't, in the case I'm thinking of, was not her personality at all. And she avoided it like the plague. But through the course of working through the self-reflection, she realized that it was her only, that she needed to do it, and that for her own self-care. I've also seen people that they begin to set those boundaries that might not have been possible, or that they might not have imagined they could do. Um, I've also, one of the wonderful things about the program is that I've seen people create friendships with each other through
Mm.
going through the program together, and they become sort of their own like advocates for each other, and they have sounding boards because they're very, they're in similar situations. Um, I often, can't get people to stop talking to each other and sharing what they're feeling, but really the transformation is endless for people, because once they give themselves the opportunity to stop and reflect, what matters to them bubbles up to the surface, and then they feel inspired to act.
Mhm.
I'll have to think of some other examples, but there's just been a lot of, um, rich epiphanies and sort of, attitudinal changes that have really served people well around their caregiving responsibilities and boundaries.
That's great. I was seeing you had a thinking face on, so I was seeing if
Oh,
you were
oh,
going to share anything else. You don't have to, but I was
it
like,
was my
maybe she
listening
has
face.
another story to share. It's
No,
okay.
no.
Um, and someone read your bio that we had on the website that you worked on AARP livable communities in your area. And they were wondering what pieces of this AARP livable community did any of it impact like caregivers? Were there pieces in that were dedicated towards caregivers?
So yes, Cincinnati is new to the Livable City initiative. And so my role was to sort of create a roadmap for them to take on and become a livable community. And of course, caregiving is the flip side of the coin of aging. And you really can't support an older population without supporting caregivers. And so, making sure that caregiving support resources were available, and bringing together whatever community assets we had around caregiving, whether it's our local area agency on aging, we have, other senior and caregiving facing organizations, the health systems, and all of that to come together and build out initiatives. Now, there weren't, at this point, it was identifying who at the table should come and build out, but they hadn't gone as far as building out specific initiatives around caregiving. But the recommendation certainly was to include caregiving, as a component of a livable city. Because it doesn't, again, it's two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, to have that lifespan
Yes,
covered, you know.
right, right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then someone else wanted to know, what are some employer caregiver friendly policies that you would recommend that these people attending today, they work at organizations who want to support caregivers, but also recognize they need to support caregivers within their agency. So do you have any recommendations on what employers can do?
Sure. So, there's a lot of talk about, paid time off, paid leave, giving employees, the time and the space to provide care, is important. Um, you know, Looking at specific resources, obviously if you can subsidize any type of care, vet any providers or have, in the ready. I mean, usually those are larger employers that have the resources for that. But I would say bringing your, employees together, training, so that they can talk and they can learn from each other and that they can have, having workshops and resource groups for employees is important, but then also to train your managers and managerial staff to recognize, and HR to recognize the needs of caregivers and be on the lookout and be able to sort of dial them in to what resources are available. I think is really important because caregivers won't self-identify.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they feel guilty because they've taken, and everybody on the team might know that, Sally is caring for her mother and she's running her to chemo and this and that. And they're all kind of, helping her out, picking up some of the slack here and there. But I think there's a tremendous amount of, guilt in the workplace for caregivers so that they won't necessarily raise the issue like I need help. So having managers who are, trained, to be sensitive to that and to sort of, help out when they see that, I think is another area that can really help. And sort of, reducing the stigma around it,
Mm-hmm.
and because it really is everyone, as I mentioned, from the mailroom to the boardroom can be impacted by caregiving and in an instant. So it really is every person on the team is may very well be facing caregiving at some point.
Yeah, before we started this talk, Mally and I were talking a little bit about this too. I'm working on a caregiver initiative for employers as well. And one of the things, apart from the paid time off and the flexibility that keeps coming up, and I'm not sure how to make this into some of our advisory stuff for HR teams, but addressing the culture that there is around assigning things around it's almost like caregiver bias, or caregiver discrimination, because we know that Molly is leaving more frequently or has to leave early for this thing. So she's not at this meeting. She doesn't get an opportunity for this promotion. She's not in this space. So she doesn't get access to this high profile client, like there's, and in some of our agencies, it's a little bit different, right? Because we're all service providers and a lot of us are doing direct practice who are here today. But still, like, we know that Jane leaves early, and like you were saying, Molly, they get to pick up the slack. And so now we're going to stop asking Jane for things, and she's going to miss an opportunity down the road. So yeah, just making that awareness piece, and really thinking about the culture within your agency about asking for time off regardless of the reason, asking for flexibility regardless of the reason. I think that there's a lot of grace that we can give to all of our employees, but including our caregivers.
Oh, absolutely. 100%. 100%.
That was all the questions that we had. Are there
Okay.
any other closing comments that you
No,
want to?
I love having the conversation. I think, the time is now and we're all, in this together. I really appreciate it. And just, if anybody has any questions, reach out to Marie or myself and, I'd love to keep the conversation going.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Molly. Thank you
Okay.
everyone for coming.
All right. Bye.
There it goes.